Let us pray. Lord, as we turn now to read again from your scriptures, pour out your Holy Spirit upon us so that we might hear the voice of Christ in these words, calling to us, beckoning to us, offering himself to us. Bless us now with an awareness in our minds and our hearts of the living presence of Christ in our midst, our good shepherd. Amen. The gospel lesson is from John's Gospel, chapter 10, beginning to read in verse 1. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief only comes to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In order to understand what it means for Jesus to be the good shepherd, I think we need to have some idea of what it means to be Jesus' sheep. And as it turns out, John gives us a picture of that in the story of the blind man that Jesus healed right before the passage which we just read, in which Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The blind man, he must have been confused and bewildered. How did he find himself in the middle of a firestorm of accusations? He didn't start anything. He was just standing there begging for a little bit of help like he has always done. He had been born blind. He didn't know any other way of life. But suddenly when a group of people walked by, he became the center of everyone's attention. The disciples pointed at him and asked Jesus, whose fault is this? Did he sin or did his parents? Imagine how you would feel if people suddenly started to talk about you like that. Jesus didn't answer with an accusation. He healed the man's blindness. Jesus spat on some dirt, making a mud paste, and spread it on his eyes, and then told him to go wash it off in the pool of Siloam. Imagine what this man must have been thinking as he stumbled away, not being able to see toward the pool to wash the dirt off of his face. Who was that? Why did he do this to me? This isn't going to work. Nothing ever works. But then he washed off the mud and he could see. It's when he goes back, though, that all the questions and arguing start. Who did that to you? What do you know about him? What do you believe about him? It became a major religious scandal. The religious authorities grilled everybody. They grilled the blind man, his parents, his neighbors, and his friends. The blind man tried to defend Jesus. Look, he did a good thing. I was blind, but now I can see. Isn't that enough proof? But the authorities just shouted him down. They were looking for a way to label Jesus as a sinner and as someone who was dangerous. So that by the time it was all said and done, the religious authorities had declared that the blind man and Jesus were both sinners, and they were both dangerous. The blind man went from being a blind beggar to being driven out of his community by the religious leaders. You don't know anything, they declared, so don't even try to talk to us. You don't have anything to say that we want to hear. Now, when Jesus hears that the blind man has been driven out, he finds him, and he talks to him, and he invites him to see and to trust and to believe in him. Jesus asked the blind man who can now see, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Well, who is he?" The blind man says, "Show me who he is. I want to believe." And Jesus says, "You're looking at him right now. You're talking to him right now." And the blind man says, "I believe." And then he worshiped Jesus. The religious leaders, they just condemn and they expel the blind man. He becomes a problem for them because they can't tolerate his life and his experiences. They don't fit into how they understand God, and they don't fit into what they see as their role. In contrast, Jesus heals and guides the blind man to believe in him. He makes possible a relationship of gratitude, trust, and seeing the presence of God in life. Two very different ways of caring for people. Two very different ways of shepherding the flock. Is Jesus a shepherd? A good shepherd? It's interesting that the word good here, describing the shepherd, is a word that really can be translated as the model shepherd, the beautiful shepherd. The idea of what all shepherds should be is such an expansive idea that Jesus said, I'm the beautiful one, this shepherd that is the model for all shepherds. It's a big deal when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. It's not just kind of a throwaway line like, I'd like to be a shepherd, or I'd like to be a cat, or I'd like to be a dog, or I'd like to be an elephant. Not the spirit animal Jesus is talking about for himself. He's identifying himself with something significant, a powerful, powerful image in the lives of God's people. The good shepherd, the good king, the one God will send to help restore and preserve and lead and keep God's people as God's people and in their place in the world. It's a big deal to say, I am the good shepherd. Sometimes I think we have a hard time understanding why the people of Jesus' day couldn't just believe that. Why they couldn't see him and understand who he was. Why wouldn't you believe someone who did as many amazing miracles and miraculous things? Why wouldn't you believe them when they said about themselves, I'm the good shepherd. I'm the one. Now, of course, some people believed, those closest to him, They seem to believe, the ones directly impacted by his words and his actions, but certainly not everybody. Definitely not most of the people who had authority and power. They seem to be the ones least likely to believe. And most of the time we say, oh, they just didn't want to give up their status and their power, as though their disbelief was just a matter of craven self-interest, as though they knew better, but they just didn't want to acknowledge him. So ask yourself, really? Really, if you believed, if you knew, and if you understood that Jesus was, as he says, God's Son, would you just choose to ignore it? Would you rather not say anything about it because you didn't want to have to deal with the consequences? In fact, all the gospel accounts seem to show that for most people, it wasn't easy to understand who Jesus was and what was happening in his life and his ministry. Remember how frequently those closest to Jesus seemed to all the time be confused and uncertain. Even Peter, when he declared that Jesus was the Messiah, he immediately kept talking and objected to what Jesus said about being Messiah meant, so that Jesus had to turn around and rebuke him and say, "Get behind me, Satan. You're on the side of men, not on the side of God." Peter could say the words, but he didn't seem to understand. Remember how often Jesus would say to all the disciples, "Don't you understand yet? How long am I going to have to be putting up with you all?" Remember how so often he had to pull them aside and give them special instructions to understand his parables, his stories? When we look at it, it never seems to be completely straightforward, instantaneous faith and belief that most people come to when they interact with Jesus. Especially in John's gospel, the path to faith and belief seems to zig and zag with questions and misunderstandings, doubts and denials and surprises. Sometimes faith is present for people in hard places, but it's absent in the lives of people you would think who would be the ones who would most readily receive it. It's the blind man who has his sight restored, who can eventually see and believe who Jesus is, but it's decided religious leaders who are blind to the gift of God's presence that Jesus brings in their midst. I really don't think any of us can say with complete certainty, "Oh, I would have known exactly who Jesus was and what he was doing. I would have believed wholeheartedly without any hesitation." Do you think that's what you would have said? I think it's more likely that we would have wondered, and we would have hesitated, and we would have questioned, and we would have been a little skeptical. We would have wanted to believe him, but maybe not have been sure how to believe him. We would have been 100% with him on some days and about 5% on other days. If we had been present during Jesus' life and ministry, we probably would have been just like those people who found themselves drawn to him, but also found themselves uncertain, full of questions. Can Jesus really be the one God has promised? The good one, the good shepherd, the one we've waited on for so long? Maybe it's fair to say that if we were there, we would have just been like them, sheep without a shepherd. That's how Jesus saw the people. Once when Jesus saw a large group of people who had been looking for him, perhaps hoping that he would do another feeding miracle and provide them with another meal, the people were so anxious and gathered around and seeking them that it says Jesus looked at them and had compassion on them because they seemed to be to him sheep without a shepherd. Remember the Samaritan woman who met Jesus at the well, and they talked, and he told her so much about herself, and then she went to the village and she told everybody there in her village, "I just talked to a man who told me everything that I've ever done. Can he be the Messiah?" As though it's still a question for her. She puts that as a question out to the people in the village. Would you have been certain, or would there have been questions, wondering, zigging and zagging, trying to understand? I think that in order for us to have believed then, and maybe even in order for us to believe today, We would have to have this deep sense that Jesus knows us by our name. We'd have to have some sense that Jesus is able to speak directly to us. That our lives, that my life matters to him, that he can make a difference of consequence in our lives. And there's something about in this passage where Jesus is coming right out and saying, I am the good shepherd. There's something about this whole setting, it seems to me, that in order for us to understand Jesus and hear Jesus and believe Jesus in saying that he's a good shepherd, we have to have a very clear sense of our own sheepiness. Now, I know that's a word I think I've just made up. I think it's a good word, though. I think it's an accurate word to describe us in order to understand and be open to and receive the reality of Jesus as our good shepherd. We have to be aware of our own sheepiness. And that can mean a lot of things. It can mean our proclivity to wander off and get lost in a lot of different times and places in lives. It can mean that sometimes we just put our head down and eat the grass that's right in front of us and keep walking along closer and closer and closer to the cliff and never look up to see until we fall off. I think we have to have a sense of our own sheepiness, our ability to nibble at each other, bite at each other, and push each other out of the way. We have to have a sense of our own sheepiness, as we said in the prayer of confession, like lost sheep. We have erred and gone astray. We have to have a sense of our own sheepiness in order to understand the reality and presence of the one who in our midst, as God's presence, is our good shepherd. Because it seems to me that in our life together as Jesus' sheep, that's where we really begin to understand and know and feel the presence and gift of Jesus as our good shepherd. In order to know the good shepherd, you're just going to have to look around and see all the sheep who are here sitting next to you this morning. You're going to have to understand the hard places in their lives, where they're calling out because they feel alone, where they can give witness to the times when they felt led and guided and cared for and sustained. You're going to have to look around at all the sheep you're sitting with this morning and begin to see how the shepherd is present in their life and in their life and in their life and through them in your life too. About 100 years ago, there was a well-known religious scholar, Christian scholar, who was writing a work on prayer, and he was asked if he wanted to explain to somebody what the Christian faith was, what was it like, what did it mean, he'd say to them, well, you just need to go and live for 3 months in a little village in Switzerland that I'm going to tell you about, where most of the people go to church. They just get on with it day in and day out. You go and live with them, spend some time there, get to know them, get to understand them, and then after you've been there and after you have a sense that you know them and they know you, then come back and we'll talk about what it means to be a Christian, what you've discovered there. Don't waste your time now trying to develop and come up with theories. Just go and see it being done in the midst of a flock of sheep who know that Jesus is their good shepherd. Be there. Build relationships. And if you do that, then things will start to make sense. And you will start to know and discover things you wouldn't know otherwise. You'll start to hear a voice that you know, the voice of someone who knows you deeply. The voice of one who says of himself, I know God, and God knows me, and we know our own. It seems to me that to know the shepherd, to trust the shepherd, to believe the shepherd, you have to be living in the midst of the shepherd's sheep and open to the life of a shepherd who gathered these people unto himself. Knowing the shepherd is receiving the witness to him in the lives of those he calls his own. Knowing the shepherd is being open to the reality of him saying, it's not just here in this sheepfold, it's not just in this flock, but I have other sheep who are not part of this fold, and I must go and gather them too, for there is one shepherd and one flock. That's the kind of thing that you will understand and begin to learn and experience when you start to study your own sheepiness. And when you start to be open to it, and you start to receive it as the gift of the one who says, about sheep just like you, I am the good shepherd. I will lead you in green pastures, beside still waters. I will restore your soul. I will guide you in paths of righteousness for my name's sake. I will be there with you in the darkest valley. I will prepare a table before you in the presence of your enemies. Your cup shall overflow, and my goodness and my mercy shall pursue you all the days of your life. That's the kind of thing you can only learn when you open your lives to the sheepiness that God gives to all of us. Some of you may remember a wonderful member of this church named Betty Sullivan. She was a member here with her husband Alvin for many, many years. She was the librarian over at Blankner Elementary School for many, many years. Just a few months after Helen and I started to work at Park Lake, Betty Sullivan's beloved husband Alvin died. And we had a funeral service for him here. And within about 2 weeks, her 2 sons had come to town, packed up her house, and moved her over into Westminster Towers. When I went to visit her for the first time in Westminster Towers, it was just about 2 weeks after her husband's death, she just seemed to be numb. She just seemed to be in shock. How did I get here? What happened? I was just willing to do whatever my sons told me was best for me, but I don't know. What is this? But she was there, and she began to find a new direction in life there. Do you know what she began to do? She began to shepherd some of the other sheep who were going through the same experience there in the towers. And in particular, 2 dear friends that she made there after moving in. A woman named Vidabelle Butcher from South Florida, another woman named Margaret Fisher from Tenafly, New Jersey. Vidabelle was a Methodist. I think she's the only person I've known in my whole life named Vidabelle. And Margaret was just somebody you would expect right out of New Jersey shores, in Tenafly, New Jersey. But Betty Ann began to shepherd them and began to make sure they found their way to here at Park Lake. And they began to sit Sunday after Sunday after Sunday right here in these front pews, faithful, participating, calling me to come see them because they had comments about things that were going on, concerned about the public displays of affection that some of the young people were sharing in church. And so evasively I had to say, well, isn't it good that they're in church? Shepherding, being concerned, caring through their 80s into the 90s. Now there's one reason I lift that up is because there's an image some of you may have seen in some of the photographs about Park Lake over the years, is a picture that Frank House took of when we still had a 15-passenger van that would drive people over from Westminster Towers, park in the front of the sanctuary before there was a curved drive, circular drive, park in the front there and drop the people off. And there's a picture of Betty Ann and Margaret and Vidabelle holding onto the railing, holding themselves up the steps with one hand and holding their purses with the other, watching them step by step, Sunday after Sunday, go into the church. Who's leading those sheep? Who's leading those sheep, I asked myself. It must be the Good Shepherd. And in following them, I began to understand the places, and the times, and the experiences, and the occasions where I heard the voice who knows my name, who called me as well. I am the Good Shepherd, Jesus said. And we'll know that when we embrace the experience of being Jesus' sheep together, learning from each other, open to each other, giving ourselves to each other. Sam Wells is one of the pastors at St. Martin's in the Field, in Trafalgar Square in London, and he tells the story one time of leading a little group in the Godly Play experience. Some of you know what that is, a way of teaching children Bible stories. And he was teaching the children a story on this passage from the Good Shepherd and from Psalm 23. And he said he emptied out all of the little pieces that you use to tell that story. There were both children and adults there gathered when he was telling it. And as all the sheep came tumbling out of the box, they were all from different pieces of wood, and all the different pieces of the wood were different colors. And as he was putting them there, he began to wonder and to ask to the children, what's the significance of them all being different colors? And they were quiet for a second. And then one child said, well, it doesn't make any difference at all. We should treat them all the same. Oh, that child had been taught well, Sam thought to himself. But then he continued to wonder and asked them, well, how did they get that way? These different colors, these different shapes, these different sheep. How can that be? None of the parents knew what to say. Most of the children didn't know what to say. And then one child said, it's because they all have the same shepherd. Just like you, just like me. Amen.